Welcome back. So let's talk about the administration's priorities, and one of them are tax cuts 2.0. I spoke with Larry Kudlow for tonight's Maria Bartiromo's Wall Street program. I asked him about the timeline for any more tax cuts. Watch this. Are you working on another tax cut plan right now, Larry?
Yes, we are. Tax cuts 2.0. In a meeting in the Oval, I guess 2 days ago, he looked at me and he said, let's get it out by September. We'd love to have a 10% middle-class tax cut, and we would love to strengthen and make permanent some of the other tax cuts. My great friend, OMB Director Russell Vought, has put a $1.4 trillion plug to make tax cuts permanent, and we'll probably use that to craft our package. It'll come out sometime in September.
Wow, what a difference as you see all the Democrats running against President Trump wanting to raise taxes. Joining us right now is the Wall Street Journal senior writer, Jon Hilsenrath. Jon, it's great to see you this morning. And one issue that you keep bringing up, and we bring up a lot on this program, is debt and deficits. So the president is talking about tax cuts 2.0. How is that going to fly in the face of all of the worry about $22 trillion in debt?
Well, there's two issues. There's a political issue and an economic issue. So the political issue is, right now, at least, Democrats control the House. Unless that changes in 2020, and perhaps it could, the tax cuts aren't going to go anywhere because, as you said, the Democrats are looking to raise taxes. The economic issue is exactly what you say. Government spending is increasing at a really fast rate, and we're running $1 trillion budget deficit this year. So is it prudent for the government to be talking about tax cuts in 2020 without doing anything on the spending front?
No, it's interesting that you mentioned, though, the political story on the House, because if you listen to Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader right now, when he does interviews, he always throws in this line: takethehouse.com, because they are fully expecting to take the House in November, particularly after the impeachment situation. Maddie, what do you think? You think that's possible?
I think it's fully possible, particularly if the House and the president continue to talk about why it's so important for Republicans to retake the House, tax cuts being the prime example. Remember that the individual tax cut expires in 2025. That means every American's tax cut that went into effect in 2018 will be gone. So House Republicans need to continue to talk about the fact that Republicans were the only ones that passed this tax plan. There were no Democrat votes supporting it, and that every Democrat running for president has campaigned again on repealing those tax cuts for the average American family.
Dagan, jump in here. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at the fact in terms of our budgetary problems. There was a story out yesterday, and the Wall Street Journal editorial page writes about it today, that student debt forgiveness in the U.S. will cost the government more than $200 billion just over the next 10 years. The Obama administration really pushed these plans. They didn't introduce them, but students only have to agree to pay 10% of their discretionary income for 20 years based on these income-based repayment plans, 10 years for those who work in public service, after which their balance is forgiven. So $200 billion, Bernie Sanders is running on canceling all $1.6 trillion in student debt, but we're already doing this, John. And what is the cost of all of these programs to the American people and taxpayers?
Well, Dagan, I think it speaks to a larger budget problem. You talk about the specific budget problem relating to student debt, and that's a huge issue because the government is subsidizing all this debt, and colleges have used it to just jack up tuition. But the larger budget problem, in my mind, is this. There's all this talk right now about how strong the American economy is, how we've got the best, the strongest American economy in the history of the country. And what I'm asking is, if that's the case, why are we running trillion-dollar budget deficits when the economy is so strong? You're supposed to be running surpluses. That's what happened in the late 1990s.
But Dagan, correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't you going to get the pushback from the administration to say, I want to run a deficit and this kind of debt with rates where they are right now? When you've got rates where they are right now, isn't this the time, if you're going to borrow that much money, to do it?
Right, and also you try to make small changes to entitlement programs, Medicare, Social Security, and even Medicaid, and people on the left lose their minds. So what do they want? You can't have it both ways. You can't complain about the debt and the deficit and then not want to try and right-size these entitlement programs, which are literally swamping the American people and swamping our budget. The Medicare Hospital Trust Fund, I say this over and over again, it runs out of money.
It's broke.
In six 6 years.
Yeah, 6.5, I think.
6 year, 2026, I think, is based on, and then they're only going to be able to pay 89 cents on the dollar. So just let that happen, and you will have an automatic cut in benefits.
How come markets don't care?
Well,
Markets don't care, Scott.
They don't care until they care, Maria. But to your point earlier, once rates do start normalizing, they're going to care. And I think you're right, Dagan. I mean, to the fact that that runs out in 6.5 years or so, you're going to have to take from somewhere else to cover that. That's another issue. John, one quick thing. Do you think the spread of coronavirus, let's say it gets a little bit worse in the next few months, pushes these tax cuts as more of a likely happening?
Good question.
You know, on the coronavirus, it's certainly a very serious health scare. It could become a health crisis. But if you look back at moments like this in the past, for instance, with SARS, they haven't left a very big economic imprint out there. So, you know, for now, I'm going to stick to that until we, you know, until or unless we see this spread more globally. It just doesn't look like it has that kind of economic impact.
Yeah, but John,
hopefully, God willing, it'll pass over.
Now, because of the coronavirus fears, there's this whole new conversation about possibly the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates this year after we all thought that they were on hold, right? Did you hear anything from Jay Powell this week that struck you?
Well, a couple of things from Jay Powell struck me. You know, one is, you know, I think that the bigger virus that Jay Powell is looking at isn't coronavirus, it's the disinflation virus. They just can't get inflation up to 2%, and they're very concerned about that. And if that continues to be the case, they could talk about interest rate increases. The other thing relates to the
increases
budget.
You're talking about cuts, right?
I'm sorry, cuts.
Rate
You're right.
cuts,
Cuts. That's a little reflex I had there. The other thing is that Jay Powell was talking about what happens the next time we have a recession. The Fed does not have a lot of ammunition. I don't think interest rates are going back up. So when we have another downturn, the Fed isn't going to be able to do much. And that comes back to this whole fiscal policy front. Do we want to be cutting taxes now when the economy is growing at a pretty good rate, or save our ammunition for when it really needs it?
Yeah.
I think that's a question that people need to be asking.
You make a good point. I think that's where you were going with that, too. John, it's great to see you. Have a wonderful weekend, my friend.
Thanks a lot. You
Jon
too.
Hilsenrath, Wall Street Journal.